feel free to actively use this chat, the chat while we're going in session. Ask questions. When I start taking questions from the audience, we'll be very happy to get the questions from the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself to ask your questions, that's perfectly fine too. So hello everyone, welcome. My name is Vignesha Chinia. I am a part of the Future Africa team. I co-direct the Ambassadors Program with my colleague Takunda Uche, and I have been with Future Africa for about 2 years now. I will be moderating this forum today. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat again. I'll start by just introducing Future Africa a little bit for some of our guests today that have not heard about us before. So very often we get frustrated at the inefficiency of our governments, corruption, poor service delivery, and what we try to do as citizens, we demand better from our leaders. We want things to improve, and we just are dissatisfied with what we're given. And what we try to do at Future Africa is to start these conversations around all of these things, bring people, like-minded people that want to be in the public sector, and kind of push for these conversations so that we're enabling young people to collaborate with governments and like-minded individuals to achieve those mutually defined goals. And at Future Africa, we strongly believe that engaged citizens are the centerpiece of democracy, and that youth voices are so crucial for sustainable development. Here today, we are having a Future Africa Forum. What this is, it's a seminar series where we bring in experts from the continent that share their perspectives about the continent's growth trajectory from their own research and work. We try to create this broad awareness of the challenges and opportunities for the development on the continent. And we also enable aspiring public sector leaders to explore various avenues for these challenges that can be addressed over this platform here. Today, our theme is Mind the Gap. And a lot of the times this statement is used as a warning as a warning to avoid, essentially. So today's speaker will explore how paying mind to the gaps is essential to expanding different structures that exist within the continent itself, different policies that are impactful within our communities, and minding the gap is essentially meant to address the necessity for inclusion, equity, and accessibility. During this forum, our guest today, she will discuss her journey to her current role, the gaps her work has tried to fill with reports like promises to keep the impact of COVID-19 on adolescents in Kenya. And I really hope that every one of us has had the chance to read the report. It's amazing work that she's put in there. And we want to see how young people should take the necessary steps to build on this effort to kind of bring youth and get them all engaged within our communities for the better of the future. For today, you will witness a conversation between our guests and myself for about 20 minutes. And then after that, we will start taking questions from the audience. Like I said, again, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we're going. And feel free to unmute yourself later and ask your questions when we get to that point. I will make sure to let everyone know when we get there. So without further ado, I guess the guests in the room, I would like to give a very, very warm welcome to our guest today, Julie Mwabe. Julie is currently the gender advisor in the Policy and Strategy Unit in the Office of the President of the Republic of Kenya. Just a quick, very humble introduction about Julie. She's very, very passionate about what she's doing about redefining the narrative for women and girls. And she's currently, like I said, the gender advisor at the Presidential Policy and Strategy Unit in Kenya. In her role, Julie acts as the lead interlocutor between the presidency and the line ministries on gender responsive policy across interventions focused on youth and adolescents. In 2021, Julie conceptualized and led a national study promises to keep impact of COVID-19 on adolescents in Kenya. That was one of the first in the world to look exclusively at the impact of COVID-19 on adolescents in Kenya. And prior to her current role, Julie spent the last decade working on public health issues where she delivered outcomes and opportunities for children and women, particularly in the areas of HIV, AIDS, maternal health, and child protection issues. In a conversation with Julie recently, I was blown away by her journey and her experience, and all of the different things that she shared with me in that conversation about her journey so far. And I'm really excited that she gets to share that with all of us today. So without further ado, just want to say a really warm welcome to Julie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, I'll just remind everyone to mute their mics for this first part of the session. So I just want to start with Julie. Why don't you tell us a little bit from the beginning? Tell us about when you realized you wanted to work in public policy making or in the public sector. Is this a dream come true for you, or is this an opportunity that you stumbled
on? Thanks. Interesting question. Did I ever want to work in government? No, never. I mean, government to me was corrupt, as you said. You know, it was letting down its citizen. Nothing works. There was everything that was wrong with government. I mean, that is what I knew. I did, however, from a very long time, I was very, very passionate about. I think it was more issues around children. Hi, Abel. You know, I mean, for a very long time, I think I knew I wanted to help. I knew I wanted to make a difference. I mean, I think when I was young, I just always remember asking why were people homeless on the road? You know, why is this? Why do I have and they don't have? And as most African children, many of us, you know, we sort of, you know, grow up in homes where we're told you're good at this. You can be a good doctor. You can be a good, you know, we have this career lines for us. So I was attracted to being a doctor. I started off with medical school. And I'm not sure if it was for me or for my dad, but it is what it was. I went to the university. I ended up with a degree in neuroscience. And essentially it was like a pre-med course. And I had like a sort of like a 6 months, you know, sort of break where I had a break where I could come back home. I studied in New Zealand. I was fortunate, got a scholarship and I was in New Zealand. And literally I had 6 months where kind of between my end of my pre-med and when I could get into med school. So in those 6 months, I decided, you know what, let me come back home, spend time with my family before I go back to school. And I remember getting on a flight from New Zealand through Dubai. And when I was in Dubai, I think it was like a 12-hour layover. And you had those big screens. I don't know if they have them anymore, but then, you know, they had this huge screens that had like the news going on for CNN. And I remember seeing a story on drought in Kenya. So I had been away for 4 years. And I was like, oh, drought in Kenya, okay. Moved by the story. And then I went back then, it wasn't on laptops, you got the computers by the airport. And I remember Googling drought in Kenya. And one of the few articles came up was a UNICEF article. And I clicked on the article and, you know, it was a communication person. Her name was Sarah Cameron. I wrote to her. I said, I've seen this story put out by you. I'm coming home for a few months. I'd love to help. Let me know what I can do. Anyway, and click send. I got to Nairobi and I think I checked my email again a day later and she'd responded. And she said, look, actually, we may need some help. Are you able to come into the UNICEF office? I came in, I went in, and I remember, I think on the second day, they were like, okay, the help we need is actually in the refugee camp. We needed, northern Kenya, go to Garissa, go to Dadaab, and I was very excited to go. So long story short, that's how my career started. I stumbled on it. I stumbled on, I was dealing with in the refugee camps, trying to get children across from Somalia to the border to get, their papina being weighed. And I remember one child dying in my arms while I was trying to, cross a child across the border to get some help. So my 6 months ended. And, at the time my boss, the need was immense then. I asked my university if I could defer to the following year, and I never went to med school, long story short, so I stayed on and I worked at the UNICEF for 7 years. It was in a communication office. I'd never done anything on comms. I'd never, my background was in neuroscience. I was a science major. And 7 years into the role, I, got an opportunity. My boss said, look, you're really good at what you're doing, but you don't have the qualifications per se. Like if you applied for a job in this, they'd probably limit you on what qualifications. So I took a year off, went and did a master's degree in development studies, and came back to UNICEF a year later. And then moved again to, when I came back, I got an opportunity at the US Embassy, which was very different. This time I was working with the US ambassador to Kenya, policy issues, again, comms. I've learned some things on writing by then. And working on, and as working in the ambassador's office now gave me a wider scope of what was happening in the country, the issues. And I found myself drawn more to issues, again, around children, because, children and the injustice and what was being done. And in that role, started interacting with many partners, including the government. And I remember, I think in 2019, I showcased some of my work at a conference in Vancouver. It was called Women Deliver Conference. And in that conference President Kenyatta happened to be in that conference, came and spoke to me. We had a conversation. I was like, yeah, this is what I do, I came back to Nairobi and I got a call from State House the next day and basically asked that, they would like to meet. I thought they were asking if I could go showcase my photo exhibition that I'd showcased at the conference, but essentially they asked me to consider joining the team at the president's office to advise on gender and children issues. So I stumbled upon a lot of them. I stumbled upon everything, my career journey, but so far, so good. It's been a great journey so far.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. I'll take a question from the audience right now. Gabriel asks, what changed your mind to work with an institution you initially perceived to be corrupt, the government?
So what changed my mind is so I had been at the US Embassy 7 years. It's a comfortable job, paying well, the perks were good. Everything about it seemed to be working and felt like a dream job in some ways, in many ways. But having said that, I started feeling that, the ideas I was bringing to the table were very limited. It was one of those jobs that, and most jobs, you stick to your job description. And when you find yourself growing, there's always someone saying, no, you're out of, you're stepping on someone's boundaries, that is somebody else. So I think I was already feeling, I'm feeling squeezed into the space I was in. And when I got called by, government, I was very, all I'd heard was how terrible it was. I didn't even know where government, where do you even apply for a job to join government, but then I think the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could change some things, that maybe I could move the needle forward in some, in some areas that I was passionate about. And having now worked for like 15 years, both at the UN, both at the US, I realized there's not much you can move without the government, right? And even the organizations all that come in as NGOs, there's only so far they can move without the government support. So I think the opportunity of just being on the other side and seeing how things work. Was it scary? Yes. Did everyone tell me that I was making the mistake of my life? Yes. But I risked it. And here I am.
That's amazing. So you share this idea of everybody telling you you're making the mistake and you're risking it, like you don't know what's in there. And I feel like a lot of the times, us as young people, we see a position in the public sector as a haunted house, essentially. Like we're too scared to know what's inside, but we know that if we had the courage to do it, we would do it differently, right? So looking back now at your career, all the things that you've achieved working at the US Embassy, at the UNICEF, what would you say has been the most influential, or who has been the most influential in motivating you to actually join the public sector? That was the turning point where you were like, okay, I will do it, and I am taking that risk regardless of what everyone around me is saying.
So one of the motivators, actually, which is strange, is on my last year working at the embassy. So how it works, if any of you have ever worked, interested in working a mission or being in a mission, what happens is you have a lot of the policies, like for example, for the American embassy, has to be approved by the Americans themselves, right? So you have to have an American boss. Everything has to be approved in DC, and including Twitter. It's every single thing had to be. I couldn't essentially have everything is approved. That's the role of a mission, right? And so at the time, I think I had a supervisor who would just not let me do much. They would just it was a lot of no. So I was frustrated. And I was looking for change. So I think that was part of the thing, spurred me to, I'm going to try anything at this point, However, having said that, I went, when I was, having this conversation to join government and is it something I could do? I met with the president's senior advisor. She's the deputy chief of staff. Her name is Ruth Kagia. She's now my boss. She's my direct boss. And I met her, and she's been in public service. She'd worked at the World Bank for 25 years. So she was coming from the other side as well, and for a long period. And I looked at her and she said, you know what, Julie, I know this is a tall order. I know it's not easy. It's not an easy, coming from where you've come in, and I'm sure you've had a lot, but I guarantee you, I will make this an adventure for you. I'll make it the best experience for you. Come, let's see what we can change for our country. So I think that made me feel confident about my decision, and to date, no regrets.
Amazing. We love to hear it. So walk us through your experience a little bit working for the government as a young female sitting at a table where I'm assuming you were constantly surrounded by, male figures, and how you navigated that situation, and what are some of the challenges that you faced throughout this journey?
So one of the things that, you hear a lot about government, they don't know what they're doing. It's they're not, there's so much negativity. So my first 6 months of being in government were very scary. I walked into rooms with the smartest people I'd ever, met in my life. Like, you walk in and the conversation, I was in a role that most people who had their PhDs had 20 years experience. They've been in it for long, their lifelong, sort of careers as public servants. They know their stuff. They have historical data and everything. And number one, I have no, other than doing, I think, a photo exhibition or something, or just having the passion, I didn't have the experience. I didn't feel like I had experience for it. So went through a lot of imposter syndrome. I often felt, okay, I'm not sure what I'm doing here or why I'm doing here, So the past 6 months, I was very quiet. I'd go into the rooms and sit at the back and just listen. And on the other end, a lot of people were like, who is she? What is she doing here? Like, you know, why her? But having sat through those conversations, I think coming in fresh-eyed without the experience, for a long time I felt was a challenge, but ended up being my greatest strength, because I could listen to things and I'm like, but what does this mean for young people? Like what, you know, you've got to, and then, you know, you're having all these policies, you're doing all these recovery strategies, you're having all these trade agreements. And I'd be like, but where do young people fall in this? Or where is this, you know, like, and so I started asking those questions that were not being asked before. I started seeing things in a very different way. And then COVID struck, I think, under a year after I joined. And this was such an opportunity for me to sort of come up, you know, like I said, my background, I was science, so I was very analytical in my thinking as well. And I did this study. I traveled the country looking at the impact of COVID on young people, on their things that were not even considered in a lot of government policies, things like their mental health, how are they doing mentally, you know, how are they, there's, you know, there are all these policies we put in place, for example, the laptops, you know, we said, okay, there's a whole laptop project and having children in Kenya have laptops. But when there was a COVID, none of them were allowed to take these things home. So looking at those policies and saying, okay, well, this is not working. Clearly, some of these things are not working, but then being able to tell the stories in a different way, using stories which were not essentially mostly government, and also using data, you know, and I always say you can deny the stories, but you cannot deny the numbers. And I did see somewhere in the chat, someone saying if I'm allowed to criticize government, but so this report is actually, if you looked at it, it's one of, and it almost sounds ungovernment, because government is essentially shooting itself in the foot and saying issues such as 16% of girls didn't go back to school when schools open, you know, or 50% of 10 to 19-year-olds are experiencing symptoms of depression, you know, things like those. So it's not positive data. It's actually saying, is raising the red flag and saying things are not as good as we thought it was. So, so I think I've, you know, been able to sort of bring in the data, bring in a fresh perspective. Like I said, the first 6 months, everyone questioned what I was doing. But then I think when I started coming to myself, or being just more confident about what I brought to the table, people started listening, and it has continued to date.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing. So someone asked, were there any challenges that you faced on the road to where you are now? If not, what seems to be the challenge for young people to join? You just started the conversation about young people and how COVID-19 affected young people, or that you were very passionate about bringing young people into the conversations that we were having. So why? I'm asking, where's the gap? Why do we have the gap right now? Where can we bring young people in, and why don't we have young people in so far?
I think one of the key gaps is, I don't think many people know what's the road to joining public service, you know. Mm-hmm. It is often not very clear. And I think, and this is probably the same, it's in Kenya, in many African countries, it's almost like there's a ladder through things. Like you almost have to wait for one generation to finish, and then there's another one to come in. So a lot of the meetings, a lot of the tables I sit in, there's extremely, significantly older policymakers or decision makers who are older than my own father or the age gap is completely different. But then I think it's just still, for a long time, I thought that I needed to be aggressive. I needed to be bossy. I needed to dress government style. I needed to have my government coat on and, play that, try, sort of be that dominant person to be able to sort of have people listen or hear me or give me an opportunity. But then I've just learned that it's not really about control, it's about influence, and where's my space for influence. My space is in data. I'm very passionate about data and evidence. I'm very passionate about storytelling and telling you, yes, I see you're giving me this policy, but what does it mean for for this person who is in the village, who is in this school, what does it mean for her and how does it translate to them? And how do they have access to some of these things? A lot of the times you see governments say, okay, we have put up funding for youth. There's a big youth funding, but then how many people know where to access it? Where's the website? Where, so how do you sort of merge what is available to where young people are? What are they accessing? They're on WhatsApp, they're on their phone. So how do we make this accessible to them? Putting this applications, jobs, tents, whatever on the newspaper. How many young people actually buy the newspapers or have, so it's those kind of nuances and making a case for them, making an investment case of, okay, we need to sort of define and change things so that we are actually targeting the right audience in a way that they can access and make use of those platforms.
Yeah. And I know in your report as well, you do mention like representation of adolescents, strengthening their role in leadership and meaningful participation in decision-making processes, essentially to ensure that we have their perspective and their perspectives are heard and their needs are met. And you mentioned that a lot of the times you are bringing in those questions, and that was where you were really passionate. So what does that look like for you, where their needs are met and their perspectives are heard? That young people are able to climb that ladder. We have a lot of people in our audience today that are waiting to climb that ladder, but might not know where to start, or what part of the newspaper do I even look at? Do I start buying the newspaper? So just to give them an idea, where do they start? And what does that look like for you when you say young people are there and they're heard and they are being engaged?
So for me, in one of the things in my role that I've been able to do when I was working on this study, I insisted that I needed to work with young people all through. So in terms of whoever we were interviewing, were all young. Of course, there were adolescents who were looking at, but then I got the people who did the data collection, the people who did the videos, the reporting, the designing, I just had them, you tell us what you want us to know. I think there's a lot of we speaking for young people rather than, government speak for young people rather than them giving them platforms to speak and have their voices. And I have essentially, whenever we have conversations on youth engagement or youth policies or even COVID strategies for economic empowerment, I always insist, man, I will not count your panel if there are no young people. I insist that we need to have them. They know what works for them. They know their solutions, and it's just time to invite. It's different. It's not always welcome. And I've just, but the more I've made it the standard, the more, the people who I work with will be like, Julie, we know for you to accept or for us to have this meeting, we need to find the young people. Okay, fine. Sometimes I'm like, let's go have this meeting in a school. We're talking about school programs. Let's go to the school. Let's sit there and because when you're in policy, you're so often so removed, you're often so removed and you're essentially listening to people like you, speaking to yourselves. Mm-hmm. But, when I talked about influence earlier, you have to, it's active. It has to be active, looking out and pulling those people in. For example, if we are working on policies around ending FGM, and we are on a table and it's all educated, all PhD holders, we're all talking on the gender, then we're not really helping. We have to sort of reach out to those women who are part of the cutting, get them, come into, let's have this conversation. What is working for your community? And have them in those in those tables and let them guide this, the way forward. In terms of finding opportunities, it is difficult. When I started off at UNICEF, again, it was an email I got, it was a volunteer opportunity that led to a job that, but then I think what I would say is you've got to identify your values, and when I talk about values, sometimes, we're caught in what is values, what is purpose, what is your mission, but your values essentially is what you really, really care about. What is that thing that you really, really care about? that you'd do for free, that you would take a risk for. For me, it has always been children and their rights and the quality around them, and it has expanded, of course, to women and other rights. But it's one thing that I would work for free. I'd work in a cushion job for. I'd take a risk and jump in government for. And it drives me. It motivates me, and it you know, I keep thinking, it keeps me up, because I'm like, okay, anytime I'm in a conversation, whether it's even about trade, I'm always like, what about, you know, how do we bring in the angle of young people, and how do we bring them into these conversations? What about businesses that young people are starting and them as entrepreneurs? How do we include them into some of these policies? So essentially that has been it.
I'm gonna ask you one more question, and then I'll start taking questions from the audience. But I wanted to ask, what do you think are preventing the youth from getting engaged or being on that platform? As you say, like, you're one of the exceptions that are welcoming them, making sure that, you know, children are present, or adolescents are present, young people are present when you are having a conversation, or you know, giving a talk, for example. You want to make sure that young people are there. So what is preventing them from actually being present and being a part of the conversation? Do you think it's being scared of the public sector? Do you think it's like we talked about earlier, we don't know where to start, or do you think they're just imposter syndrome even? You know, where is it coming from, and what can we tell the young people in our audience today where to start?
I mean, it's a mix of many of the things you've said, but one of the critical things is a lot of young people don't have good mentors. You know, we don't have good, people in leadership who are actively seeking out young people and bring them to the table, or seeking them to show them the ropes, you know, to sort of guide them. I think it's a culture that you hear it a lot. Everyone is like, I'm looking for a mentor, I'm being mentored, but then how is there people actively doing it? I think is very limited. We get caught up in our jobs, our job descriptions, and everything we need to deliver, and somehow that often falls through the cracks. You know, the mentorship, the bringing people to the learning. I mean, when I was applying for jobs, even as a 21-year-old, very many years ago, when I was applying for work then, every job you apply for, you know, it has this 8 years experience in, you know, and I'm always like, where am I supposed to find the experience, right? And so just being, you know, I always, like, you know, in our office, I always say, no, are we able to sort of bring young people with the drive, or, you know, there's something that they have that you may not have the experience, but we guide them and let them sort of learn. You know, like I said, I have been a product of that. I had my boss take a chance on me, somebody very inexperienced, very without the PhDs, without even the right degree in the field. And I recently asked my boss, you know, what was it? Why did you put me here? You know, why did you essentially, it was a job that had been advertised for a year and a half, you know. And she looked at me and she said, you know, it was just your passion and your willingness to learn. I was looking for someone, sorry, I'm joking. I'm not emotional, it's just something, you know, it was the willingness to learn, the willingness to sort of just, I'll do it. And let me tell you, that part of the job that's not glamorous. For example, I go for many meetings and I end up being the minute girl. You know, they're like, Julie, please take the minutes. And, you know, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's taking the minutes. But then initially I used to be like, why am I taking the minutes? But now I really love taking minutes because I learn. You know, I sit in cabinet meetings, and maybe I've just been invited to take the minutes, but that's the one way I have learned, and I know what's going on in the government, what's being run, what's being led, what the issues are, you know, and it has been such a learning opportunity for me. So I think the key advice I'd say is just start with where you are. Whether you're volunteering and do your best in where you are right now, and you'll get there. It may not be today, it may not be in a year or two, but you will get there. Just be diligent, try your best, put in the effort. It is easy to be caught in, I want to be start with the funding, the amount, the salaries and the lifestyle and what you want to do. But I always say, when you're passionate, the money will come, the opportunities will come. If you're like me in public service, you probably won't be paid as much as those in the corporate field, but you'll have enough and you'll be fulfilled, and the opportunity to so daily go to work and make a difference is so fulfilling. It's so fulfilling for me, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Amazing. This is such good advice. Thank you, Julie. I will take a question from the audience. Someone asked, what are some common misconceptions that people have about working in government that you also had to unlearn? In the beginning, we talked a lot about, how public sector is viewed as this, big haunted house that we don't want to step into, or, we hear all of these things about African government being corrupt and all of that, and you now being in that space and like working for the government, knowing that your entire family said this is a risk. What are some of the things that you had to unlearn to be a part of this and be able to have your voice heard and make a change in the space?
A couple of things. Number one, and the big one for me, was the government doesn't care. And I think that for me has changed a lot, having met just such amazing people working around the clock to try push things. Granted, sometimes it's a small number, granted the move that, it moves very slowly, the wheel churns slowly. But then I think I went in sure that no one, they're all out to sort of be corrupt and eat all they can while they can. But I've also met really amazing people who mean so much and so, mean well for the country and want to move things forward and working around the clock on so many things. It is a very thankless job. I have to say, you get used to you don't really get used to it, but there's a lot of criticism. I cannot say that there's people who come and say thank you for ABCD. It's always like there's no this, there's no this, there's no happening. But it's part of the job, So I think that was one of it. That was the main one. And the other thing was the government doesn't know what it's doing, right? And only to go in and find the brightest of people. I found so many, like for example, in Kenya, we have so many really, really good policies. The issue is not the policies. The issue sometimes it's the implementation, right? How do you get this for the citizens to feel it and to feel that they're cared for? So that is where the challenge is, and it's a big one. It's a big one, and I don't make small of it. But then it's I have been inspired by the policies that are in place, the leadership in many of these sectors, and just sitting around the table and just see people deliberate and move things. I mean, that has been very inspiring for me.
Amazing. And someone asked in the chat, and I also have this question: why is it so often that we have so many good policies in that we want to implement, but we fail at the implementation process? And they ask, how do we address this?
One of the things that, and I'm sure it's many African governments, and maybe different in different parts of the world, a lot of policies are very siloed, right? So, for example, when I was doing the adolescent study, there was, when it comes to sexual reproductive health, there are very many policies in sexual reproductive health, then education, then health, then, and a lot of this, the policies, the offices, the ministries, the funding is also very siloed, and they sometimes don't speak to each other, right? But when you have a young person, I'm not body parts, I'm not health or education, or, I am Julie and all this, and it's a 360. And I think the key gap is our government and many other governments not able to look at, sort of having that multi-sectoral engagement to be able to look at people as a whole, rather than as, Ministry of Water. So we're only going to look at water issues, don't care if they're hungry, don't care if they're in school, they don't care, that kind of thing. And how do we move forward in a more, sort of engaged and multi-sectoral way to sort of move the agenda forward.
Amazing, thank you. I'll take a question from Alhansa and then Achola. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, thank you so much. First of all, Mrs. Mwabe, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us. My question is in relation to the work environment inside of the government. So how difficult would you say it is to apply new technological / data-driven methods of problem solving in a work environment with people that are much older, as you have indicated before? Are they open to these types of changes when it comes to evaluating the problems that we have in the field? And how have you dealt with it? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. I think, yes, it can be a challenge. It is a challenge. It is a big one. Bringing in the new technology to the different ways that things have already worked, that things are working. I mean, that's happening so far. For me, I found my allies. I found the few people who I was able to sort of sit with and sort of share the concept. For example, the one on the adolescent, I said, look, we really need data for this. And once I got the allies and, and sort of brought a few people around the table, I think it just started that way. And I feel that after that, I like I said, I report to the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Office of the President. She has the convening power. She was able to see what else, it took a while for her to see where I was going with some of these ideas. But once she was able to understand it, she was able to bring the different ministries, the different cabinet secretaries around the table, just be like, okay, can we try this? We were criticized when we put out this report, because we're like, okay, why is the government sounding like the NGO now? How can the government say you have all these kids, not in school? Isn't it the government who's meant to be ensuring that they're staying in school? So why are you putting up the data? In a way, it was a way to say we're being open about what's really going on, right? And I think it opens doors for collaboration and other people to work through. I am currently working on a study on consolidating the gains of digital learning in Kenya, right? So Kenya 5 years ago put out this policy of laptop projects. It has not worked, but the idea is that there's connectivity, there's electricity in most parts of the country. There are devices, there's the content in that has been developed, but children learning, and that's what the study I'm doing. Yes, I know I'm going to come up and find data that shows it hasn't worked, but how do you present this? How do you package it? How do you show that, okay, this hasn't worked, how do we do things differently? Like I said, you can dismiss stories, but you cannot dismiss data. And I think even however old-fashioned as you see, you assume people are, you cannot dismiss data. And I think that's why I'm very, sort of find a way of influencing policy through data. I hope that answers you.
Thanks, Khansa, for your question. Sorry. Achola next, and then we'll take a question from Christopher. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. I do not hear from her. Can we move to Christopher for now?
Okay, sure. Then. So this and I just want to actually sexual and reproductive health space. So there are a number of things, challenges that I have experienced. So we have policy. I would like to get to. So one is what happens when policy is in place or has been formulated, and then there are some issues, issue of inclusion. And when I talk about inclusion, for example, you know about the recent reproductive health policy that was to be launched, but had to be kind of postponed because of issues around inclusion. And then also maybe policies that have been in place, but they overlooked some of the issues. And in this case, in regards to SRH, let's say the Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy 2015, which again is currently. So you know, matters as sexual and reproductive health and adolescents, sometimes they tend to be sensitive, but there are problems that exist. Let me say, for example, the issue of contraceptive usage for young, should I say, young parents, or those who have ended up being parents at an early age. So from where you sit, what happens when you have such cases? Because maybe we're advocating for right now for this to be looked into, but somehow the government overlooks that this should be catered for. That adolescents and contraceptives, that there's a sensitive issue when it comes to these young parents, when it comes to those young, should I say, rather older adolescents who are just transitioning into adulthood. So I'm asking that because I do advocacy, and those two areas, inclusion and the issue of sometimes policy overlooking some of these problems, is something that I've experienced in the field.
Thank you, Christopher. I missed a bit of what you were saying, but I think I got the gist of, and I'm guessing you're talking a lot about the sexual reproductive health bill rights that is currently still being discussed on policy level and still being approved, going through the processes. And I mean, that's a question I've gotten a lot in my line of work. Why, for example, the government wouldn't approve contraceptives for young people. I always say that, you know, there's, number one, there's a lot of responsibility that's often placed in government that, and I have seen this bill in particular come forward to be discussed and often been sent back for amending, and there's still a lot of back and forth. I think some government, you know, you sort of course, there's the advocacy, there's all the thing, you know, the rights on different things, but then I think government tries to look at, you know, across the board, including faith-based, including, you know, what is the other side of things? What happens if you open the doors to some things? Does everyone gain? And if those who are impacted negatively, what happens? So policies take a while, right? I mean, this is my 4th year in government. There's some policies that, you know, I looked at on the first year, some things take time and take change. But Christopher, what I'd say specifically for that bill is that, you know, the advocacy groups to continue advocating, but then at the same time, I think be able to, how do you sit with government on a table without, with both sides, without listening to each other and saying, okay, where do we amend, rather than, okay, this, you're doing it wrong and that's it. I mean, I've sat in meetings where, you know, as government, you're criticized a lot and blocks the conversation. So having more of those open communications to sort of move the needle forward. But that has been, the specific bill you're talking about has been a very, very sensitive one.
Thank you for your question, Christopher. I'm going to take Achila's question from the chat. She asked, how are you using your position to push for more presence of youth in key spaces. And then she says, a lot of the times representation of young people on certain key tables is picking up pace in most governments, but the habit of tokenism is still persistent, and the voices of young people are still silenced. Physical presence is visible, but active participation is still lacking. And she asked, what can be done to eliminate tokenism in government structures?
That's a good question, Achola. I mean, like I said earlier, even if it wasn't tokenism, even if you applied, even if you rightfully joined, got a role, I think as a young people, there's so much discrimination against us, for women, and I'll be open about this. A lot of young people, you get into jobs and it's always assumed you slept your way to the top, or you had, you gave some favors, or someone. There's always those assumptions, but you just have to choose not to listen to them. You've got to just focus and delve into the work and do what you can. What am I doing about bringing young? I asked. I mean, I am not hiring. I don't have higher power, but where we have engagement, where we have stakeholder engagement, where we have, meetings and discussions and these tables, I always have like a segment like, hey, can we bring in X number? If it's a meeting that has 30 people, can we ensure that at least 5 to 7 are, young? I mean, they don't even have to be in the field, they could be, but bring them in, even if it's just to listen in. So I think I've seen a few people do it. It's not the norm, it's not common practice, but I believe the more young people get into public service, the more, we'll move the needle forward. We sure will, slowly, but we will.
Thanks, Julie. I will take questions from Ayanda, and then Lukman, and then Nukulunga, and then Mahamat. So in that order, when it's your turn, please just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here because I'm currently doing my PhD in multidisciplinary gender studies. So you're such a wonderful point of reference for me as someone who wants to be in a similar role in the future. And I enjoyed your podcast where you spoke about the patriarchy of the pandemic, but that's a conversation for another day. My question then is, what do you predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years in your field as someone who's interested in this particular field? And how can young people best align themselves to that prediction?
Thank you, Ayanda. So in the next 5 to 10 years, in the gender field specifically, there's the Generation Equality Forum. And this is a forum that a lot of countries have committed to sort of, advancing the gender equality. A lot of heads of state, including the Kenyan head of state, organizations like, the Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation have all committed to this. So what I would advise you is find spaces to engage with the Generation Equality Forum. It is a movement, it is moving. There's a lot of funding for gender. What I believe is, I think the gender space is going to sort of, let me say this. A lot of progress had been made in the last 25 years. Countries had made a lot of progress in terms of education, girl enrollment to school, maternal care. There's a lot that has advanced. It is more girls are in school now than there were. More women are surviving childbirth than there were 25 years ago. More women are in the workforce and in leadership spaces. And I think this COVID has it has impacted it greatly. We've seen a lot of gains that have been lost, but then there's a lot of momentum now. And I think it is a coming together. It is, finding spaces to advocate for your voices, finding the policies that are in place, and how in your sector, in your field, how do you implement these things? The world is so connected now. And I think you found me on LinkedIn and sent me a note, and it's that kind of thing. connect with those people who are, doing this work. Ask them, how can you help? How can you volunteer? Please, where can I participate? Join the webinars. And I think there's more tools now to sort of participate in these conversations, in these global discussions, and also to find access to funding for programs and the tools necessary to sort of move those. So I'm very passionate also about helping people join the dots. Where I see there's funding for something, where I see there are volunteers, I'd find ways of connecting. And it's those kind of things that I'm really advocating for. Where is our platform? Where is this platform? Young people can go click, I want youth, this, filter, and sort of find opportunities come out for them. That is really missing. And through other discussions, at least for Kenya, we're trying to see how we can sort of develop that platform. Again, this is under another platform called Generation Unlimited, and being able to age, I think it's 10 to 35, going in, finding opportunities, finding source of funding, volunteering, jobs available, and also those who have this opportunities, a place where we can sort of crowd pool, and I think that's one of the things that we're doing on that. So I understand there's a lot in this space, and I think it's a very exciting and dynamic space to be in.
Thanks, Julie. Lukman, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you very much, Julie. It has been nice hearing your story and advices this evening. My name is Lukman. I'm one of the Future Africa Fellows. I just have a simple question for you to help us understand this concept well. As we are aware, there are so many policies existing within our government institutions and agencies to empower and solve certain social issues within our communities. But we know many of them fail during the implementation phase, as we just talked about. So one of the reasons you gave us was due to financial constraints, but I think it's more than that, which make a policy fail to be implemented. So what other factors could you please highlight so that we can also have in mind what makes many other policies stagnant on table? Thank you.
Thank you, Lukman. I think, yes, like I said, a lot of African countries, we do have very good policies in place, so that the flaw isn't that the policies are not robust or they've not been put together. They are there and they're very strong. It's the implementation. Sometimes I think the politics, I think our continent is heavily and unfortunately driven by the politics of the day. That takes center stage in, like right now, Kenya, we're just about to go for our elections, and for those of us, for someone like me who's in development, it's very it's so hard to move things right now because the discussions, it's like our window has essentially closed because a lot of it is in politics. And where you have governance and politics meet, like for somebody like me who works at the president's office, in the next government, that will not be the job I'll have. I will probably not have it. So I am job hunting. If anyone has a vacancy somewhere, please. But the truth is, the politics of the day influence governance. And I wish there was a way that, those were two different, that you could be a politician and, because then you have a transfer of government, then you have new government leaders, then you have new agendas. And sometimes what one administration starts halts because another government will come in with their own agenda. So there's a lot of that sort of, so I'd say politics does really, really influence implementation. The other thing is, it is the corruption. It is the corruption, you get the funding coming through for something, and before the procurements, before the diversions, before it gets to where the money needs to get, it's a process. And I think corruption is just, for a lot of our countries, it sort of has just really brought us to our knees in a lot of this, in the ideas and progressing in politics. The other one is, like I said before, is how do we have those in advocacy, and those in government sort of come together and agree on a way forward. I think a lot of times people have their mindset set already. Those are activists, so the door is blocked. You're just an activist, or those are government. They probably don't know, they're not doing what we want to do or in the way we want to do. So how do we find those ways of communicating better? How do we find those ways to sort of keep the discussions going through transitions, through government transitions, through political turmoil, and still sort of have those agendas? So I think those are some of the things that sort of slow down the implementation of policies, the utilization, and also the monitoring and evaluation. Are we monitoring what is being done? Are we evaluating? Are we saying this is not? Are we consolidating those gains? Has what is really working? And for a country like Kenya, where you have a lot of development partners, donor supported programs, I mean, there are times I go to a county and I'm like, you have about 50 donors in this small region and nothing just seems to be changing. What is it? Who's really gaining? Who's really gaining? I mean, that's another discussion. And so it's, how do you sort of centralize maybe the pool of funding, the pool of ideas, and have equity? And that's what we're talking about, minding the gap. How do we ensure that whatever is in the pot for the certain development agendas is actually being distributed well and to the people who need it the most, right? Why would you have one county have better roads, electricity, good schools, and another one have children still learning under trees, no electricity, and still be in the same, country? How do we sort of change some of those?
Thank you. I hope that answered your question. I'll take Nokulunga and Mahamat next, and then we'll see how we're doing on time and if we have time to take other questions. But keep sending your questions in the chat as well. We'll take them as we can.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm Nogulunga and I'm a Zimbabwean, also one of the Future Africa Fellows for the 2022 cohort. I'm also an SRHR activist, a researcher and a writer. My question is, as young people, how do we maintain being independent and avoid being swallowed by partisan agendas in the government? In cases, for example, where we are talking about women and human rights issues.
Thank you, Nokulunga. Thank you for your question. I mean, like I said, government, when you're once in government, politics, it's almost like it's this marriage of, sort of politics drives who's in government, right? And governance. So I often, like, right now, I'm amazed. I mean, if you just stand on the TV and you watch people in political rallies and you hear the rhetoric, you hear how people, like, oh, I mean, I've seen you when you're leading on development issues, and then you see how someone flips their conversation when they're trying to get the votes. It's always such a mumbling way of sort of seeing the dynamics. Like I said earlier, I think the key way to remove it, to staying independent, is have your evidence. And that's why I'm very passionate about data. Have that evidence, because the evidence is what will lead and hold you true to your discussion, to your sort of your agenda. I was never a researcher, and I don't even consider myself a researcher, but I think with every meeting and the experiences I've had and the spaces I've seen that, where policy is actually, shifting, is where there's data and where there's the evidence. So sort of being able to gear and sort of narrow into that evidence. When it comes to the sexual reproductive health rights, the government is still very conservative. When you come into sort of government discussion and quickly say, we need to have, contraceptives for young people, or just the different, which are true, it's the way you package it. I think they're still very conservative, and they're like, okay, maybe there's a catch here. What if I say this? I will probably offend this group of people. And there's always that sort of being careful not to be offensive. So again, like I said, it's always in how we package the information. It's how we sort of be willing to sort of have the discussions in an open and bring the right people around the table.
Thank you, Julie. Mohammed, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Julia. So me, I'm Chadian. So my question is just only to asking about the, now we are more than the 2000, since 2008, the most students they have done the degree, most of them, they have the bachelor's and master's. So the government, they don't give them chance. So what advise those people? Those advise people, because then when you see them government, they're saying just the time you go to school. Then when you have done, the government does not can help you. So now me, I studying in Rwanda since 2019, but here most of the young just they have the good vision. They're saying when they have done at the campus, they're saying they want to go to doing their own businesses. But for our mentality from church, we don't have this chance. So what advice as future leaders of tomorrow? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mahamat. I hear you on the, sometimes seeing the barriers in terms of education, get the next course, get the next certificate, get to be able to get this. But I don't think you need to you don't have to be in government to make a difference. You don't have to be in those, how can you make a difference in the space you're in, right? How can you use what you have to drive you? Yes, like I said, it could be starting your own thing. It could be small, but then I think it's about educating yourself in terms of researching, in terms of what are those opportunities that are there. Sometimes I feel like it's always about who you know, who knows who knows. I know a brother who knows someone who sort of helped me apply for this situation, for this, and I got it. And I know a lot of people always ask, how do I get this volunteer opportunity? How do I get this funding? And like I said, it's a gap. It's one of the gaps that I've been actually trying to mind, especially how do we get this platform where this information is available for you to apply for. We are, I guess we are all part of the government in one way or the other. And like I said, how do you make the change in the space you're in without sitting back and waiting for the job to be employed, to be, for someone to look for you, because they will not look for you. I think that's the harsh reality. I was actually telling someone last night that we were lied to growing up. There's a song that used to play in our radios all the time about, it's in Swahili. So it says, so many vijana, mwisho wa kusoma utapata kazi nzuri sana. Translated to, go to school, when you finish education, you will get a good job. And I think that sort of brainwashed a lot of us to sort of feel that was the one track to finding, opportunities. So I think it's just sort of changing our own mindsets and not really waiting for the employment to when it's going to happen.
Amazing, thank you. I hope that answers your question. I will take one last question from Toby. I'm so sorry, I see so many hands up, but we are running out of time, but I'll take one last question from Toby.
Thank you very much, and apologies for the background noise. That's my nephew trying to get into the call. But yeah, I really love your story, Julie. Very, very inspiring. So I currently work within the policy and public affairs landscape. So this is really helpful in terms of looking at how policies should work in practice. You mentioned earlier that you stumbled upon a lot of opportunities that led you to where you are today. So my question is pretty much around personal and professional development. So are there, and I think you've probably alluded to this, but are there like specific things that you had done to set yourself apart from others to show that actually, you were fit for the roles that you found yourself in?
Thank you, Toby. Yes, there were some things that I did. Number one, Julie, are you able to go to the refugee camp? I'm like, yes, I'll do it. Julie, there's a meeting at 5 p.m. Do you mind taking the minutes? No, I'll take the minutes. Julie, there's a meeting we're planning. We don't have the hotel or looks messy. Are you able to go move the tables? Yes, I'll do it. I think that was it for me. I have been willing to take on anything and everything. And I think it's the attitude of not feeling that is below me. I cannot do that, because in each, it is, sometimes it's an inconvenience. Yes, sometimes it's not. You may feel, I did not go to sort of school and do all this to be able to take it, but you cannot afford to have that attitude. Just be available. I think for me, like I said, the big thing for me was identifying my values. What did I really care about? What I cared about was service, right? And I've been willing to serve in different capacities, big and small. It could be in the neighborhood. It could be, it could be outside. It could be anywhere. It has been in the various, it could be in my, I have a son now, it could be in my son's school. Do I volunteer? Yes. And I think the more I have sort of had, a heart of service and willing to serve, it has sort of just opened more doors for me. Because when you see the times you serve someone and it leads to a different conversation and someone's like, actually, you know what, there's someone I'd like you to meet. And it's sort of, and that's why I say I've stumbled upon it, but I think a lot of it has been led by my own values. And I say, your values, you got to take the time. You've got the time to sort of understand what are your values, and essentially, what do you really care about? And, we always look at mission-driven statements in all organizations, but what is your own personal mission? What is your statement for yourself? And I think once you're able to identify that, you'll be able to sort of wade through. It may not even be in the same industry, right? But like I said earlier, I knew I wanted to serve, and I've always known that I'm very passionate about rights, rights for children, young people. And in a way, every job I've taken, every opportunity has sort of, has had that in mind. And I think when you've already identified what your value is, you sort of find yourself within the perimeters. And like I said, your values may not pay you, they may not make you rich, but then they'll keep you up enough to keep going and keep channeling. And so that for me has just been the big one for me.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the end of the question session from the audience. Thank you all so much for all the questions in the chat. I just want to ask Julie last few words for our audience today. We've heard about your journey. It's been so inspiring. We've heard how you stumbled upon this opportunity and finding your values and pushing through, and all the wonderful work that you're doing to push young people into the leadership and into just having their voices heard. And thank you for all of that. So just any last words for our audience today? There's a lot of young people that look up to people like you and are hoping to follow that same journey. What do you have to say to them?
I think what I'd say is, I have been, I keep trying to, when you're filling a form, how they give you your age brackets. I fell off the youth bracket, and I've been still trying to sort of, being 40 and a youth, which is, it doesn't apply anymore. But I know how it is to be trying to sort of get a volunteer position or get an opportunity. And it almost feels like you think you've got it, and then there's somebody who's like, oh, you just need one more certification. You apply for a job, you're like, yeah, you're almost the right fit, but you didn't have this, For me, who especially is in, I work a lot in the gender field. I think women and the girls, and I hope a lot of women here, we fall more, we look at opportunities and quickly discount ourselves and quickly feel, okay, out of the list of 8, I have 7. So I'm not going, I'll wait till I get the 8th one. I keep saying, just go for it, knock. You will get a lot of rejection along the way, you might, but your one door is gonna open at some point. Go for it. Like I said, the big one, identify your values. What is it you really care about? I know sometimes it's easy to get desperate and want to just apply for anything and everything and whatever, but then you get in and quickly realize it's not the space for you. And some spaces, be open to, that something was not for you, but for me, government was not for me. I've given it a try. And it's ended up being one of my most fulfilling experiences. So being more open-minded to this kind of things, and use the devices. I mean, use the resources you have. Spend some time. I see a lot of things in LinkedIn, and I see, spend some time in this. Find out, connect, ask questions. Be willing to ask somebody who you admire or look up to on LinkedIn, like, hey, do you mind like a 5-minute, half an hour call? In my experience, a lot of people are open to this. So just getting out of your comfort zone a little bit.
Thank you, Julie. I just want to wrap up this conversation and thank you so much for joining us today. This has been, at least for me, very inspiring, and I'm hoping, just looking at the chat right now, it seems like a lot of people really, really enjoyed this session with you today. I will ask people to connect with Julie, like she's already mentioning. She's on LinkedIn, so if you would like to keep a conversation going with her, please feel free to do that. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so wonderful. Just knowing that there's someone out there that actually made it gives us some kind of hope to keep pushing through the hard times and, spending time identifying our values like you said we should. So again, thank you so much for being here with us today. Before we go, I just want to maybe give a little bit of an overview. We have multiple different programs for Future Africa that are in session right now. We have the fellowship, like we mentioned, that are in session, and we also have applications open for our other program, which is the ambassadorship. So just want to take a moment for people to just look into these programs if they want to. They are available on www.futureafrica.net, and we would be very happy to have people join our community here. Julie has also shared her email address. I see julie.mwabe@outlook.com. Again, Julie, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. I hope that you have enjoyed it as well with our community here. But yeah, we're hoping to hear more from you and see all the wonderful things that you do from here as you go on next. I know you mentioned earlier that you're looking for the next job, so hopefully we're able to connect with everyone and keep track of all the wonderful work that you're doing. Thank you again. This is the end of our session today. Just a quick note, we will have our next forum on June 25th. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Special thanks goes out to Julie, and special thanks to all the people that have fully engaged and asked questions today. Thank you.